A monster storm, almost 1,000 miles wide.
This is going to be a big and powerful storm.
With the destructive power of an atomic bomb. A natural disaster of extraordinary force strikes the northeast coast of the United States.
As natural disaster weather issues increase over the years, emergency response officials have noticed higher response needed to those impacted from severe weather, and specifically, challenges to encouraging residents to evacuate before landfall. There are usually many reasons people give for not evacuating before a storm, and the reality is that even with the many significant storms that have ravaged our country the past years, our communication campaigns do not usually include the healthcare focus for instigating preventative action on the part of our targeted audiences. Every storm that has hit our country continues to have too many lives lost because they did not take the steps recommended to prevent the loss of lives. From a healthcare perspective, communicating about evacuating before severe weather is an intervention attempt to change behavior for the health and well-being of those targeted within the communication. In October of 2012, Superstorm Sandy struck New York and New Jersey as a post-tropical cyclone. Due to a cold air mass combining with the warm post-hurricane air, the storm built in rain and as much as a 9 foot above ground level storm surge intensity, doing massive damage to areas of New York along the Hudson River and along the coastline of New Jersey, and resulting in 67 direct deaths caused by drowning. With the approach of the superstorm, only 49% of the mandatory evacuation zone left. Hurricane Matthew made landfall in South Carolina in 2016 as a Category 1 hurricane after causing over 2.5 million mandatory evacuations throughout Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina because of its original intensity and storm path. By the time it made landfall, only 35 to 50% of the residents in the evacuation zones left. As the 10th most destructive storm in U.S. history, it was directly responsible for 34 deaths. Matthew was a danger to residents not for its wind strengths, but for the dangers of flooding and storm surge associated with the hurricane. The year following had a different reaction when Hurricane Irma rolled up Florida in 2017. During the days leading up to Hurricane Irma hitting the Florida coastline, most news and weather outlets focused on the intensity of the wind for this particular storm. While it downgraded quickly after making landfall, Irma was an intense Category 4 storm with wind speeds of 145 miles per hour or more. About 7 million people left their homes for safer locales, but almost 3 million of those were not in the mandatory evacuation zones when the Category 4 storm hit the Keys, moved up the state, and quickly lost power. The focus on the intensity and wind threat was found to have scared the majority of the population and is attributed to the high number of shadow evacuees that added to the evacuation route congestion and dwindling of fuel supplies at the time. For Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Matthew, the incorrect personal risk perceptions developed from these various bits of information to create a mentality that they were not at risk. Much like healthcare communications, this erroneous perception of risk is just like the refusal to admit personal illness. They lacked the labor of care.
Florida took the first blow from Matthew on Friday, and while the storm has moved on, the state is still feeling its effects. Matthew erased part of coastal highway A1A near Daytona Beach. Storm surge coupled with high tide is creating large and destructive waves and flooding along the Atlantic coast. It comes with at least 1 million utility customers without power and a massive cleanup operation about to unfold.
With Superstorm Sandy and Hurricane Matthew, many things should have been done differently with the evacuation order messaging to resonate with individual members of the public's perception of good. The evacuation orders should have all been mandatory, instead of a mix of mandatory and voluntary orders to boost compliance for those who did not feel the risks applied to them or felt that they knew better because of past storm experience. The orders needed to be more explicit in their direction, to include all residents in the order area, regardless of their situation or living conditions. In each storm, the residents' view of what is good for them caused them to respond differently to particular concerns. The evacuation order should have included specific information addressing those concerns that kept people from leaving, such as the ability, funds, having pets, health support needs, and exactly where to go. There should also have been specific warnings for storm surge impacts separate from the hurricane wind threats. In the case of Irma, the evacuation instructions should also have included specific direction for those who should stay and why, so that the shadow evacuations did not clog evacuation routes and take away resources and places of refuge from those who needed to leave. Public and media education during the off-season would also have helped prevent shadow evacuations, and keep messaging focused on the real threats of storm surge and flooding to high-risk areas.
With winds, you can almost always find shelter of some sort or another. With water, it's very unforgiving. As the water comes up, there's pretty much no way out at that point. So storm surge is deadly, it's destructive, and it takes a very long time to recover from.
As the last 15 years have demonstrated, severe weather and storms continue forming and pounding our coasts, while technology makes it easier for information overloads to occur. As technology makes it easier to get information from multiple sources, it also makes it easier to blast broadcast information during a crisis without actually making personal connections. Care communication must be negotiated again and again to try to figure out the best response in a given time for a particular person. Without the expression of care and relating to every individual, the connection will not be made, and resident responses will not come from a common place of understanding or risk, and poor decisions will continue to be made. At the same time, we must be careful not to desensitize the public, as extreme fears and tactics can spawn shadow evacuations and the crying wolf effect. However, if this two-way communication research based on dialogic negotiation is conducted, then understanding of intent can be built and evacuation order compliance should rise, resulting in less loss of life. Past hurricane behaviors have shown a routine issue of people in weather-threatened zones not following the mandatory evacuation orders. Many stayed because of a myriad of reasons and tended to blend their own risk assessments and concerns with the information they'd gathered through various news outlets and online sources before deciding to stay. A healthcare communication ethic centers on a good that gives us the why for seeking information and for seeking help. By approaching our communication tactics from a healthcare perspective and applying this behavioral theory to our tactical communications, we may be able to bridge the gap of educational communication and behavioral changes by helping residents internalize the good of preventative evacuation in the face of severe weather.